The rain hammered the courthouse steps in Millbrook, Tennessee, as Judge Margaret Thornfield prepared for what she considered one of her most difficult cases. Inside, two brothers sat in the front row, 12-year-old Danny Martinez with protective arms around his 8-year-old brother Carlos, both wearing clothes that were clean but clearly hand-me-downs from the church donation box. Their parents had died in a car accident 3 months earlier, leaving the boys with no living relatives willing or able to take them both. The foster system was overwhelmed, and the reality was harsh. They would likely be separated. "Your Honor," said Mrs. Henderson from Child Services, "we have an excellent family in Nashville willing to take Danny, and another family in Knoxville interested in Carlos. Both homes are stable, loving environments." Danny's grip on his little brother tightened. "Please, Judge, don't split us up. Carlos gets nightmares. He needs me." Judge Thornfield had seen this scenario too many times. Her heart ached. But the system had limitations. "Danny, I understand this is difficult, but sometimes the courtroom doors burst open with a loud crash. Every head turned as Vinny Castellano stumbled in, his expensive suit wrinkled, reeking of alcohol. With his signature arrogant smirk, at 55, Vinny was Millbrook's most notorious resident, a former mob lawyer who'd moved to town 5 years ago after some unspecified trouble in Chicago. He owned half the buildings on Main Street, charged excessive rent, had evicted 3 elderly tenants in the past year, and was currently being investigated for tax evasion. The man seemed to take pleasure in making life difficult for everyone around him. "Sorry I'm late, Your Honor," Vinny slurred, straightening his tie. Traffic was murder. Judge Thornfield's jaw clenched. "Mr. Castellano, this is a closed family court session. You have no business here." "Actually, I do." Vinny pulled out a crumpled paper from his jacket. "I'm here to petition for custody of the Martinez boys." The courtroom fell silent. Mrs. Henderson dropped her pen. Even the court reporter stopped typing. "Excuse me." Judge Thornfield's voice was ice cold. "You heard right. I want to adopt both kids. Keep them together." Vinny swayed slightly, clearly having had a liquid lunch at Murphy's bar. Danny stared at the man he'd only seen around town, usually yelling at shop owners or stumbling out of bars. "We don't even know you, mister. Name's Vinny. I live in that big house on Oak Street. Got plenty of room, plenty of money." He turned to the judge with a mock-serious expression. "I meet all the legal requirements, don't I? Single, employed, own my home." Judge Thornfield studied him with disgust. "Mr. Castellano, adopting children requires much more than meeting minimum legal standards. It requires, what? A heart." Vinny laughed bitterly. "Lady, half this town thinks I don't have one. Maybe they're right. But I got something. These kids need the ability to keep them together." Mrs. Henderson stood up. "Your Honor, Mr. Castellano has a reputation for unsavory behavior. There have been complaints about public intoxication, aggressive business practices, but no criminal convictions," Vinny interrupted, "and no history of violence against children. I may be a bastard in business, but I'm not a monster." Carlos whispered to Danny, "Who is that scary man?" Judge Thornfield looked at the boys, then at Vinny, her mind racing. Every instinct told her this was a terrible idea, but legally, if he met the requirements and passed the home study. "Mr. Castellano, are you intoxicated right now? Maybe a little. Doesn't mean I don't know what I'm saying." Vinny's voice became unexpectedly serious. "Look, I know what you all think of me. Hell, you're probably right. But these kids, they need each other. I grew up without my brother after our parents died. Worst thing that ever happened to me." He looked directly at Danny and Carlos. "I'm not gonna pretend to be some perfect father figure. I don't know the first thing about raising kids. But I got a big house that's too damn quiet, and you got nowhere to go together. Maybe we can figure it out." Judge Thornfield was torn. Everything about this felt wrong. Yet the alternative was separating two traumatized boys who only had each other. "Mr. Castellano, if I were to even consider this, you would need to undergo extensive background checks, home evaluations, parenting classes, and regular supervision from Child Services." "Fine. Whatever it takes, and you would need to be completely sober during this process." Vinny's confident facade flickered for just a moment. Yeah, okay. Judge Thornfield looked at the boys. Danny, Carlos, this is highly unusual. But would you be willing to meet with Mr. Castellano under supervision to discuss this possibility? Danny looked at his little brother, then at the man who represented their only chance to stay together. Can we think about it? Of course, the judge replied. Court is adjourned for 2 weeks to allow for proper evaluation and consideration. As everyone filed out, Vinny approached the boys awkwardly. Hey, kids, I know this is weird, but I meant what I said in there. Danny stood protectively in front of Carlos. Why do you want to help us? What's in it for you? Vinny was quiet for a long moment, the courthouse now empty except for them. Maybe I'm tired of being the worst man in town. Maybe I want to try being someone different. He turned and walked away, leaving the brothers staring after him, wondering if the scariest man in Millbrook might somehow be their salvation. The supervised visit took place at the Millbrook Community Center, a neutral location where Mrs. Henderson could observe the interaction between Vinny and the boys. Vinny arrived early, noticeably sober and wearing a clean shirt, though his hands shook slightly as he waited. Danny and Carlos entered hesitantly, still wearing their donated clothes, but holding a small bag of their few possessions. Hi, Vinny said awkwardly, then immediately seemed to regret the casual greeting. Hello, how are you boys doing? We're okay. Danny replied carefully, keeping Carlos close. The first hour was painful to watch. Vinny clearly had no experience with children. He offered to buy them things, talked about business deals they couldn't understand, and seemed genuinely confused. When Carlos asked if he could color while they talked, "You want to color?" Vinny asked, as if Carlos had requested something exotic. He likes to draw. Danny explained. It helps when he's nervous. Mrs. Henderson provided some coloring books and crayons. As Carlos began drawing, Vinny watched with fascination, as if he'd never seen a child's artwork before. What are you drawing?" Vinny asked, leaning closer. "It's you and Danny and me," Carlos said simply, showing a stick figure drawing of 3 people standing in front of a big house. Vinny stared at the drawing for a long time. That's really good, kid." Slowly, Vinny began asking better questions. He learned that Danny was good at math and worried constantly about Carlos. He discovered that Carlos loved animals and had nightmares about the car accident that killed their parents. "I had nightmares too when I was little," Vinny admitted quietly. "After my parents died." "What helped?" Danny asked, his guard dropping slightly. "Time, and knowing I wasn't alone." Vinny looked at both boys. "Look, I gotta be honest with you. I don't know how to be a dad. Hell, I don't even know how to be a decent human being most days. But I know what it's like to lose everything and feel like nobody cares." During their second supervised visit, Vinny brought pizza instead of trying to talk about adoption papers. The boys relaxed a little, and Carlos even laughed. When Vinny got cheese stuck in his mustache, "Can I ask you something?" Danny said suddenly. "Why does everyone in town hate you?" Mrs. Henderson tensed, but Vinny held up a hand. "Fair question. I came here 5 years ago after some problems in Chicago. I was angry at the world, and I took it out on everyone around me. I charged people too much rent. I was rude to shop owners. I drank too much, and I generally acted like a jerk. Are you still angry?" Carlos asked innocently. Vinny considered this seriously. "Yeah, sometimes. But maybe having you boys around might help me be less angry." The breakthrough came during their third visit when Carlos had a panic attack, triggered by the sound of screeching tires outside. Danny immediately went into protective mode, but he was clearly overwhelmed. Without thinking, Vinny knelt down and spoke to Carlos in a calm, steady voice. "Hey, buddy, look at me. You're safe. Danny's here. I'm here. Nothing's going to hurt you." He guided Carlos through breathing exercises techniques he'd learned during his own therapy sessions after his parents' death decades earlier. "Where did you learn that?" Mrs. Henderson asked quietly. "Experience," Vinny replied, still focused on Carlos. Later, as they walked to the parking lot, Danny surprised everyone by asking, "Mr. Vinny, what's your house like?" "It's big, too big for one person." Has a yard with some old fruit trees. There's a room that could be yours and another for Carlos, if you want." He paused. "And it's quiet. Maybe too quiet." "We're not very quiet," Carlos warned. "Danny talks in his sleep, and I practice singing sometimes." "Good," Vinny said without hesitation. "I could use some noise." That evening, Mrs. Henderson called Judge Thornfield with her preliminary report. "Your Honor, I have to admit, I'm seeing something I didn't expect. Mr. Castellano is awkward and clearly inexperienced, but he's genuinely trying. More importantly, he's been completely sober for every visit, and I can see a connection forming between him and the boys." Judge Thornfield sighed. "Margaret, this goes against every instinct I have. The man has a terrible reputation, I know, but reputation and reality don't always match. And Judge, these boys light up when they talk about staying together. If Mr. Castellano can provide that, what about the home study, scheduled for next week? His house is more than adequate, and he's already enrolled in parenting classes. He's also agreed to regular counseling and random drug and alcohol testing." Judge Thornfield stared out her office window at the town she'd served for 20 years. "Sometimes the law requires us to make decisions that feel impossible. Schedule another hearing in 2 weeks. Let's see if the worst man in town can prove he's capable of change." 3 weeks later, Danny and Carlos moved into Vinny's house on Oak Street with a mixture of excitement and terror. The house was indeed huge, a Victorian-era mansion that Vinny had bought cheap because the previous owner had let it fall into disrepair. "This is your room, Danny," Vinny said, opening a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with a desk, bookshelf, and window overlooking the backyard. "And Carlos, this one's yours." Carlos's room was next door, connected by a bathroom. It was the first time either boy had ever had his own room. "They're really ours?" Carlos asked, touching the walls as if they might disappear. "As long as you want them to be," Vinny replied. The first few weeks were an adjustment for everyone. Vinny had never lived with children and was constantly surprised by their needs. He'd forgotten to buy groceries suitable for kids, had no idea about school schedules, and was baffled by the amount of laundry two boys could generate. Danny, mature beyond his years, took charge of many practical matters. He learned to use the washing machine, figured out the school bus route, and helped Carlos with homework, but the weight of responsibility was clear on his young shoulders. "You don't have to do everything yourself," Vinny told him one evening as Danny was making dinner. "That's supposed to be my job now." "I don't mind," Danny replied. But Vinny could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Yes, you do, and you shouldn't have to." Vinny gently moved Danny aside. "How about I cook, and you help Carlos with his math homework? That's what brothers should do, help each other, not parent each other." The transformation in Vinny was gradual but noticeable. He stopped drinking entirely, started attending AA meetings in the next town over, and even began treating his tenants more fairly. When Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow, couldn't make her rent 1 month due to medical bills, Vinny quietly reduced it instead of starting eviction proceedings. "People in town are talking." Danny mentioned one day, "Mrs. Rodriguez at the grocery store said you helped fix her roof last weekend." Vinny shrugged uncomfortably. It was leaking. "Bad for business if my tenants' buildings fall apart." But Carlos had overheard Vinny on the phone with the contractor, insisting the work be done for free and that Mrs. Rodriguez not be told who paid for it. The biggest challenge came when Carlos started having severe nightmares again, triggered by the stress of the new living situation. He would wake up screaming, and only Danny's presence could calm him down. One particularly bad night, Vinny found both boys in Danny's room at 3 a.m., Carlos sobbing and Danny exhausted from trying to soothe him. "What can I do?" Vinny asked helplessly. "He just needs to know he's safe," Danny explained. "Sometimes I tell him stories about mom and dad, or we look at their pictures." Vinny disappeared for a moment and returned with a photo album. "These are pictures of me and my brother Tony when we were kids. Maybe Carlos would like to hear some stories about brothers who stuck together." For the next hour, Vinny shared memories he'd buried for decades, stories of two boys who had faced the world together until the system separated them. His voice grew heavy when he talked about losing touch with Tony, about the anger and loneliness that followed. "What happened to your brother?" Danny asked quietly. "I don't know. Last I heard, he was in California somewhere. That was 15 years ago." Vinny's voice was barely a whisper. "I was so angry after our parents died. I pushed everyone away, including him. Biggest mistake of my life." Carlos had stopped crying and was listening intently. "Do you miss him every day?" From that night forward, Carlos's nightmares became less frequent. When they did occur, Vinny was there alongside Danny, offering comfort and sharing stories that helped all three of them heal. The change in their home life began affecting the community. Danny joined the school's math club, his grades improving dramatically now that he wasn't constantly worried about basic survival. Carlos made friends and started singing in the church choir, his clear voice surprising everyone who remembered the scared, quiet boy from a few months earlier. And Vinny, the man who had been known as Millbrook's biggest troublemaker, started showing up at school events, awkwardly cheering for Carlos's choir performances and Danny's academic competitions. He began volunteering at the community center and even started a program to help other struggling landlords maintain their properties without exploiting tenants. Mr. Castellano, Mrs. Rodriguez stopped him on the street one day. "My grandson Pedro is having trouble with math. I know Danny is so good at it. Do you think he might tutor Pedro?" "I'll ask him," Vinny replied, then added something that surprised even him. "And if Pedro's family needs any help, you let me know." That evening at dinner, Vinny mentioned the conversation to Danny, who immediately agreed to help with tutoring. "You know," Danny said thoughtfully, "people look at you differently now." "Yeah, how's that?" "Like you're not scary anymore. Like you're just someone's dad." Vinny felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in decades. "Is that what I am? Your dad?" Carlos looked up from his spaghetti, sauce on his chin. "Can we call you Dad, or do you want us to keep saying Mr. Vinny?" For a moment, Vinny couldn't speak. When he found his voice, it was rough with emotion. I'd be honored if you called me Dad." That night, as he tucked Carlos into bed, something that had become their routine, the little boy looked up at him seriously. "Dad, are you still the worst man in town?" Vinny smiled, smoothing Carlos's hair. "I don't think so. Buddy, I think I'm getting better every day." "Good," Carlos said sleepily. "Because you're the best dad we could have asked for." 6 months after the adoption was finalized, Vinny's transformation had become the talk of Millbrook. The man who had once been the town's pariah was now coaching Little League, organizing community events, and had even been elected to the school board. But the most unbelievable act was yet to come. It started with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. Danny was doing homework while Carlos practiced piano. Vinny had surprised him with lessons. After discovering the boy's natural musical talent, Vinny was in the kitchen making dinner. Still awkward with cooking, but improving steadily. The phone rang and Vinny answered distractedly. "Castellano residence. Vinny? Is this Vincent Castellano from Chicago?" The voice was hesitant, older, but achingly familiar. Vinny nearly dropped the phone. "Tony?" "Yeah, it's me, your brother. I've been looking for you." Vinny sank into a kitchen chair, his hands shaking. "How did you find me?" "Saw an article online about some guy in Tennessee who adopted 2 boys and turned his whole town around. The picture looked like you, but I couldn't believe it. The Vincent I knew wouldn't." Tony's voice trailed off. "Are you really coaching kids?" "Baseball." "I am." Vinny glanced into the living room, where Danny was helping Carlos with a difficult piece of music. "Tony, I have so much to tell you. So much to apologize for. I'm in Nashville. I could drive down tomorrow if you want to see me. More than anything." The next evening, a rental car pulled into Vinny's driveway. Through the window, Danny and Carlos watched their father pace nervously in the living room. "Dad, you're gonna wear a hole in the carpet," Danny observed. "Who's coming over?" Before Vinny could answer, the doorbell rang. With trembling hands, he opened the door to reveal a man in his early 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that mirrored his own. "Hello, Vincent." "Hello, Tony." The brothers stood there for a moment. Then Tony stepped forward and embraced Vinny tightly. Both men were crying. "I'm sorry," Vinny whispered. For everything. For being so angry. For pushing you away. For wasting all these years. I'm sorry too, Tony replied. I should have tried harder to reach you. Danny and Carlos watched from the living room, having never seen their father cry before. Boys, Vinny called, wiping his eyes. Come meet your Uncle Tony, over dinner. The story emerged. Tony had become a social worker in California, spending his career helping children in the same system that had failed to keep the Castellano brothers together. He'd married, had kids, and had thought about Vincent every day for 30 years. When I saw that article about you adopting Danny and Carlos, Tony explained, I knew I had to find you, not just because you'd changed, but because you'd given these boys what we never had a chance to stay together. Uncle Tony, Carlos asked, do you have kids? 3, your cousins Sarah, Michael, and little Emma. They're so excited to meet you that weekend. Tony's family drove from Nashville to Millbrook, the house on Oak Street, which had been silent 4 years before Danny and Carlos arrived, now echoed with the laughter of children discovering they had family they'd never known about. But the most unbelievable act came the following week, when Vinny stood before the Millbrook Town Council with an announcement that stunned everyone. I want to donate half my properties to create affordable housing for families in need, he declared, and I want to establish a foundation to help keep siblings together in the foster system. Mayor Davidson nearly fell out of his chair. Vincent, are you sure about this? That's a significant portion of your wealth. I've never been more sure of anything. Vinny looked out at the packed room, seeing faces that had once viewed him with fear and disgust now showing respect and admiration. Money can't buy what I found with Danny and Carlos. If I can help other families stay together, then every penny is worth it. Judge Thornfield was in the audience that night, and she approached Vinny afterward. You know, when you first walked into my courtroom, I thought you were making the biggest mistake of your life. And now I think maybe you were making the best decision you'd ever made. She smiled. The worst man in town has become one of the best. A year later, the Castellano Foundation had helped keep 12 sibling groups together and had funded improvements to 3 group homes. Vinny had reconnected not just with his brother, but with life itself. At the annual Millbrook Community Day, Vinny watched as Carlos sang a solo with the children's choir while Danny helped run a math games booth. Tony's family had moved to Tennessee, and the cousins were now inseparable. Mrs. Rodriguez approached him with her grandson Pedro, who was now excelling in math thanks to Danny's tutoring. Mr. Castellano, Pedro has something for you. The boy handed Vinny a drawing of a stick figure family standing in front of a big house. But this time there were many figures: Vinny, Danny, Carlos, Uncle Tony, and all the cousins. It's our whole family, Pedro explained. Danny taught me that family isn't just the people you're born with, but the people who choose to love you. That evening, as the family gathered for their weekly dinner, Carlos raised his juice glass in a toast, a tradition Vinny had started. To Dad, Carlos said solemnly, who saved us and saved himself. To Uncle Tony, Danny added, for not giving up on family. And to all of us, Vinny concluded, his voice thick with emotion, for proving that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Outside, Millbrook settled into peaceful evening quiet. The worst man in town had become something no one thought possible: a loving father, a devoted brother, and a pillar of his community. And in the big house on Oak Street, where silence had once reigned, the sounds of family filled every room: homework discussions, piano practice, laughter, and the beautiful chaos of people who had found their way home to each other. Judge Thornfield had wanted to separate the brothers, but the worst man in town had done something truly unbelievable. He had not only kept them together, but had shown an entire community what redemption looked like.